So hello everyone, ciao a tutti, and thank you so much, Nick, for being here with us, and thank you so much for submitting your amazing film to Art Container, the first edition of this festival, of this Italian festival. Congrats for winning an award. Congratulations. In your short docufilm, Letters, the Art of Grieving, art plays a key role. In fact, we could say that art, together with loss and grief, is the real protagonist of this film. This is one of the reasons why your work is very fitting for a festival like Art Container, which sets out to celebrate and combine all the arts. How and why did you decide to deal with the theme of loss from this angle, the angle of art? Because it's a very original angle. And how did you come up with this idea?
So I've been a filmmaker and an educator for more than 10 years. And with my interactions with students, with people, the project has evolved through years of meeting people, starting with my own mother who died of cancer. And I think working with that grief and how it aligned with my own creativity made me realize what kind of a production I should be doing. When I started my research on trauma studies and how do you create trauma-informed media? How do you create documentaries that somewhat impact people's lives and inspire people to action? We gotta talk about this head on. We can't just say, you know what, it could be just implicitly done through narratives. So many of the people within the context of the narrative that we came up with for the past, let's say 10 years, I've collected stories from about 25 people. It's just so amazing to see how they transform their own struggles into beautiful work. And I think that could be replicated. And of course, people grieve differently. So I think what we're trying to show here is not necessarily a solution. It's more of a process. And I think addressing the solution can give people an idea of what the process means. So that's the reason why, in terms of creating something as beautiful as Letters, we're evolving hopefully to a docu-series in the next year and setting that up for something that people can meditate with. Because I mean, at this point, we are so bombarded with the media, from TikTok to all these reality shows. We need something for people to take a breath.
It was a very great starting point for a meditation on life and grief, and everyone that has been through a lot knows how hard it is to deal with it, and you don't really know how to approach it and how to deal with all the pain, if there's a way even to deal with it. So yes, it was as a spectator, and as someone who has been through this, I can only say that it has been a real pleasure to see that not people struggling, of course, but it's
that you're not alone.
Yes, absolutely, that we're not alone, and there's a sort of companionship and a link that bonds us all, and we are not alone in doing this. Question number 2 now. How does it feel, for you to be judged by a group of university students, by young people, and, people who are film and culture lovers? And also, how important is it today, in your opinion, that such a big role is given to young people?
You have to understand that this was made with graduate students at the university as well. So these are former students of mine and basically now creative collaborators. You have to come from a point of view where, in one of the universities that I was in a span of 10 years, there were 3 students who committed suicide because of the competitiveness, the culture, despite being creative. And there's the lack of emphasis to mental health. So I think in the midst of a Hollywood perspective, we wanted to make something that's somewhat bordering experimental. We wanted to have a discussion. This is the main point of documentaries, is that the reason why it is a documentary is because we're documenting life. You're looking at things through a window. There's a deeper appreciation when people watch this from an intentional perspective. You really want to watch a documentary. A good friend of mine who worked in the Game of Thrones said, you know what, I'd rather watch a crappy documentary than a crappy fiction movie. And that was something that really struck me. And she said that from a perspective of, you know what, if you want to make art as a dilettante just for the sake of art, good luck to you. That's great. But if you make art with a purpose, then that's something that will guide you throughout your life. And that's what I tell my students when they create something. Is it just because you want more likes, or is it because that you want to engage in conversation and create a direction to what you really want to do as a human being? Because I mean, I'm not blatantly saying that, yeah, you know what, your work is crappy. But what I'm saying is you got to do work that comes from the heart.
So Letters, the Art of Grieving is a delicate poetic journey, or at least it is in my opinion, in the lives and minds of three women who rely on different forms of art to cope with trauma and loss.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you drew directly from your experience? You said you drew it, you talked about your mum early on. And also, if there's something else that influenced you, and how has this project influenced and reached you on a personal level?
The narrative has been weaved because of my relationship with these women. Losing, I mean, at some point too, it's not about just losing someone. The grief can be in different ways. So I think I was just honing into one specific aspect: losing a relationship, losing someone from that regard. So I go back to my own journey as an educator, as an artist. One of those biggest things was it was my mother who actually taught me to be a teacher, to fall in love with the craft, and to fall in love with the camera, and that has reverberated all throughout. And that has reverberated to my own relationships and somewhat my own research. So let me give you an example. For example, 10 years ago, when she was diagnosed with an incurable cancer that reached her spine, I took a break from teaching and I took care of her. And every day I'd film her and I'd interview her and ask her, how did you make that dish when I was growing up? So that idea, that connection that cinema had for me was something that I could never replicate with other people. And I think I wanted to replicate the process, however. How do you make that connection with someone you have lost? And so I learned through these years that writing a letter is the most intimate thing that you can do with someone. And if you merge that with cinema, that is even way, way deeper, because you can explore emotions that have never been explored before.
So walk us through the different production stages briefly,
Sure.
to let our audience know how a short film gets made. How did this movie get made, and how long did it take you to make it?
It took me 6 years to make this.
Wow.
Though the production itself, it took us about a year because it's in different locations. The way it worked for me, at least, when I conceived this and when I applied for funding, it was through the University of Southern California and Art Therapy Association that I got something to work with. And it's always there's a craft to writing grants, I believe. And there's a beauty about that if you have creative collaborators who are willing to work with you with a project that seems to be so experimental, but they love you enough to work with you. That has been somewhat the core of this experience. So through those years, we came up with a good plan and honed into these three specific people, three women. And that was a solid decision, I would say. With Natalie, I've known Natalie since she was a freshman in college. And so I've learned her grief about her mother, and we share the same grief. We filmed her in the desert. With Joan, we filmed her in San Francisco. And so was Alexis, who was doing her MFA in San Francisco. So I think the hardest part was somewhat getting them to, because all of them have not met before. I was the one who somewhat brought them together. And so that was a choice for me to somewhat structure things from a perspective of a community. There's a communal value to things. In the end, they needed that scene, even for just a few seconds.
Today, disappearing, taking new forms, leaving white vapors on a blue sky.
So let me put it this way. It was tough and a lot of money to put that thing together. But I was happy that I had an academic institution back in it. I never made this for film festivals. It was made specifically for people who needed it.
Mhm.
But we needed film festivals so that we can actually show it to people. But none of them were not interested, not the major film festivals. So, I mean, it's been a journey for sure, but creating it has been a life-giving experience for me. And I continue it by keeping doing work like this. There are a few more things coming up in the next few months, so I'm excited.
Now that I know your work, I really can't wait to see how it goes and
Thank
what
you.
will happen. Last question.
Sure.
So through the experiences of Natalie, Alexis, and Joan, this film points
Mhm.
out the paramount importance of art therapy in coping with the death of a loved one. Do you think this film could inspire people who are dealing with the same trauma to find a kind of therapy themselves? And it could be, you know, art, sports, or anything else really. And if so, is that a goal that you had in mind when you were making the film, when you were shooting it or writing it?
I think the main goal was to have a discussion. The main goal is to understand why are there young people, individuals trying to commit suicide every year. The idea that there's an increasing amount of depression with young people nowadays, the pressures that are there, there's a lack of sensitivity towards things, and I think that has been the biggest emphasis that I had when I created this film. I grew up from a culture where men shouldn't cry, and that was something that was like emphasized that, you know, if you're a man you don't cry. It's like, that is BS. We need to emphasize as artists, we gotta feel and understand those feelings, and those feelings are essential to be human. I don't know, it's been, I think, at least for me, I've enjoyed this kind of method, as many people call metaphysical cinema, which is somewhat gauging into this meditative state of understanding visual images and sound, like a Terrence Malick movie,
Mm-hmm.
something to that effect, where you don't have to have an ending. The ending is just one of those elements. That it's the process of creating it, and I think that's the beauty about creating art, is that you create your own arc. No, it's funny because I was paddleboarding with a former student in Austin, Texas, a few days ago, and along the bridge while paddling, we saw the sign saying "Happiness is in you." So release that you're using art. I think that's the beauty about it.
It
Yeah.
is.
So that's my 2 cents when it comes to why you make movies. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's not.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is very inspiring, honestly. Your point of view
Thank
is
you.
really, really inspiring. Thank you very much for, you know, for doing this, for this interview. We really can't wait to see what movies you're going to make, and if you're going to really, you know, expand on this theme, because it's very, very important, I think.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure
Thank
for me
you.
to be
Thank
with
you.
everyone.
Was for me.
Yeah.